This conference will now be recorded.
We will begin with just restating our objective. So it's to understand the challenges to maintaining optimum gut health in a NAE production system. We're going to share research that demonstrates the role that performance trace minerals play in enhancing gut health and integrity, as well as mitigating the negative impacts of intestinal inflammation in broiler chickens. In our agendas, we're going to provide a brief overview of Zinpro. We're going to talk about some housekeeping items. I will introduce our presenter today, and our presenter will share some insights on gut integrity, as well as share some recent research conducted by Zinpro. Then we'll open it up to questions. So just a brief overview of Zinpro. Zinpro is a leader in performance trace mineral nutrition. They were formed 45 years ago, and they pioneered the research and development of organic performance trace minerals to improve animal wellness and performance. Zinpro is a family-owned, privately held company. They have regional offices in 11 countries, and they market their products in more than 70 countries. And Zinpro invests more in animal performance studies, 250 peer-reviewed publications to be exact, than all other organic trace mineral companies in the industry. So our housekeeping items. If you have any questions at any time during the webinar, please just send me a chat and we will queue those questions up for the presenter. The presentation and webinar the webinar is being recorded, and we will send a link to the recording as well as the presentation deck to you following the conclusion of the webinar. Other materials you'll receive are the graphics included in the presentation and a one-page summary of some of the research that our presenter is going to cite today. And if you're looking for additional information following the webinar, you can visit essentialfeed.zinpro.com to learn more about gut health in poultry as well as inflammation. So let's introduce our presenter. Dr. Marco Rabello is a poultry research leader for Zinpro. Dr. Rabello earned his doctoral degree in veterinary medicine from the National University of Mexico and is accredited by the American College of Poultry Veterinarians. He has conducted research on poultry nutrition and health for 20 years and services customers globally. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Dr. Rabello.
Can everybody hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, media fellows, for giving us this opportunity to show what we have on recent research on gut health and trace minerals. So I would like to start saying that all living things need trace minerals to survive. So these essential nutrients are necessary for growth, development, health, reproduction, and also for the immune system to fight diseases. So all animal species, including poultry species, either layers, broilers, broiler breeders, or turkeys need optimal trace minerals every single day in their lives. There is limited reserve for these nutrients in the body, so they need to be fueled every day. This is important because we want to take the genetic potential from these animals, either to produce or also to create well-being for them in the production facilities. Feeding performance trace minerals provides opportunities to improve poultry nutrition through every production stage. Next one, please. So we have a number of challenges now that we are dealing with non-antibiotic ever, antibiotic-free systems. They are mostly infectious, but they can be triggered or they can make worse if we don't have consistent management practices. So if we don't have a good litter management and we are not sanitizing water adequately, then we are opening the doors to have more challenges of virus, bacteria, or protozoas. So one of the most common infections is coccidiosis. followed by necrotic enteritis in most of the cases. And we would say that this is the main cause of intestinal problems in all poultry industries that are dealing with non-antibiotic ever. Enteroviruses like Rio or rotavirus are not uncommon either in turkeys or in broiler operations, and in many cases they are not diagnosed because they go very fast, but they open the door to make all these infections worse. Protozoa like Cocclosoma, like Tetratrichomonas in turkeys are very common. And also we have other issues that can trigger problems, like sometimes the feed ingredients have some problems with microbial loads, or sometimes we have to give some rough feed ingredients that create some irritation in the intestine. Dysbiosis is the term used to talk about that there is an imbalance in the microbiome of the intestines of animals. And this can be created either by mechanical or infectious challenges. And we will say is the first phase of any other intestinal challenge. Even a feed or water outage can trigger a dysbiosis, and a dysbiosis can make things a problem. Vaccines are a very important resource now when we are talking about cocci vaccines early in life. We don't want these vaccinations to overlap with some reovirus challenge, and we don't want them to be more severe than they should be, because we want to have a controlled, mild exposure. But if we don't take care of these management practices, they can become really bad. Next one, please. Recently, hatchery hygiene has been considered and proved to be very important, because the microbial load the old chicks get in early life can impact the rest of the grow out. So talking about the gastrointestinal tract, other than nutrition absorption and digestion, we would say that it is one of the most important immune organs in the body. It is the largest one, at least, because it hosts most of the immune cells. So up to 70% of animals' immune response activity is held by this organ. And the reason for that, it is open to the exposure of external factors coming through the mouth, either from water, feed, or the litter. So we know that nutrients are digested and absorbed in the intestine, and this is done through finger-like projection called villi. So that is the reason we measure the villi length to make an assessment of the intestinal integrity or intestinal health. So we want to preserve that villi length, and we want to preserve all those cells that are lining that villi. And they have a very intense renewal rate, and we have to make sure that we have enough nutrients to keep that renewal rate in good shape. But another critical important job of the gastrointestinal tract is to act as a barrier, and we will talk about the intestinal barrier system. Next, please. So the intestinal is lined by an epithelial tissue, and as any epithelial tissue, we will find that they have intercellular junctions. All these cells are tied together by proteins, and these proteins serve different functions. And one of the most important functions is keep them together, avoid the leaking of different substances like toxins, and also bacteria and pathogens that come through these gaps or gap. So that's why we call tight junctions or gap junctions, that we want to keep them in good shape to keep these cells sealed and avoid this leaking. So maintaining this gastrointestinal tract epithelium integrity is very important to prevent all these pathogens from invading the body. However, there are times when these tight junctions malfunction, resulting in the condition called leaky gut. This leaky gut, next please. These leaky guts consist on allowing pathogens to go through. And this is also called intestinal translocation of pathogens or bacteria. So the small intestinal lining becomes damaged, allowing molecules and bacteria to go through. as we mentioned. This results in more intestinal damage, and then as a second line of defense, we have to have a backup system after this lining is broken. So once this happens, the immune system is triggered, and then a response has to be done right in time. And we don't have time to have a specific response. So there's innate immune response that it is taking into place to defend the organism. The first step of immune response is the inflammatory response. So it's a process that the bird has to be ready to react and consume significant amounts of nutrients. Next, please. So this leads us to talk about intestinal inflammation. So intestinal inflammation is a condition that causes roughness in birds' gastrointestinal tract, impairing its ability to absorb nutrients and achieve its growth and genetic potential. While an appropriate inflammatory response is necessary, excessive or prolonged inflammation can become detrimental to the animal. So intestinal inflammation regulation is very important. When a prolonged inflammatory response occurs in the GI tract, this decreases feed intake and animal performance. Next, please. So animals suffering from chronic or prolonged inflammation may be unable to mount a successful immune response in the future. So these animals will keep responding and keep those intestines inflamed. And with that inflammation cycling, then limited absorption of nutrients will happen. And also stress is going to happen with that pain of inflammation. So this inflammation is pulling nutrients all the time and energy away from other important functions, either reproduction, growth, or production of meat, milk, or egg in any type of animal, even in humans. All this energy could have been used for all this purpose, but in this case, it's just working on repairing and trying to get this intestine to normal. Next, please. So our research has shown that mostly zinc, manganese, and copper can have an impact in taking care of intestinal health. So various research studies have shown that weakening of the tight junction in the gut becomes more serious when there is a deficiency of zinc, manganese, or copper. So if we compare the energy of the demand of the energy for amino acids of energy or amino acids in the immune response, we would say that trace mineral demand is even higher in this type of cell or organs. And the reason for this is that they are cofactors of many important enzymes and protective proteins that are produced by the immune system. So we are talking about those cytokines, chemokines, immunokines that are needed, but even also some antibacterial factors that are produced by the epithelial tissue. Trace minerals such as zinc, manganese, or copper are one of those key nutrients that have been proven to boost an animal's ability to respond to inflammatory stimulus. Next, please. So we have seen that inflammation regulation is very important for an adequate immune response, strong and prolonged immune response that can prevent in time further inflammation or further intestinal damage. There are two avenues through which zinc, manganese, and copper mitigate inflammation caused by a leaky gut. First is strengthening of those tight junctions, those junctions between the cells. And the other is reinforcing all the backup system of immune cells that are under the mucosa. So all those lamina propria populating immune cells will have enhanced capacity of multiplication and of function. So when a challenge occurs, the immune system can respond in a more rapid and robust manner. Next, please. So I would like to show you three pieces of research that will prove our case on how can trace minerals help on improving this intestinal barrier and keeping it in good shape to protect against pathogens. So we developed 3 types of challenges of the main and most common problems in the industry. The first will be talking about dysbacteriosis, the second about coccidiosis, and the third about necrotic enteritis. So let's talk about dysbiosis. So we induced dysbiosis using 680 birds, Ross 308 males, and we did that. This work was performed by the University of Ghent team under Dr. Ducatel. So this study was run using 340 broilers, and we compared 60 ppm of zinc sulfate versus 60 ppm of zinc from a balancing source. Broilers were fed from hatching up to 36 days of age. So we induced dysbiosis by feeding just a raw diet. This diet included rye and some other raw materials that helped to induce that irritation in the intestine. And non-starch polysaccharides enzymes, none of these enzymes were added to make sure that this raw material was present and could create this mild damage in the mucosa. Next, please. So we can see here that we picked some advantages on weight gain overall the growth period, but Avila zinc was able to show an improved zinc digestibility, but also improved intestinal morphology. We see an advantage in feed conversion up to 28 days of age and reduced mortality. But most important is that we see the intestinal villus length both at 10 days of age and 28 days of age. We see an improvement that was statistically significant for both ages compared to the sulfate source. So with this, we prove that providing zinc from Avila zinc, birds were better able to keep that cell renewal in those intestinal linings. Next, please. So duodenal tissue samples were also collected at 28 days for analysis of not villi length, but also for oxidative stress. So there was also an improvement on oxidative stress reduction. So we can see here the improvement in villi length and crypt depth was very similar, but if we calculate the ratio of villus length to crypt depth, we have an advantage in those birds that were fed Avila zinc, which was significant. A longer villi length and higher ratio indicates the broilers under Avila zinc did not suffer as much from the intestinal inflammation caused by wheat rye diet compared to the broilers fed zinc sulfur. Next, please. This is the second study, and this study was done using a coccidiosis challenge. So it was done by Southern Poultry Research, Dr. Greg Mattis. 320 male cubs were used for this study, and this was like an efficacy type study. So it was very rigorous, and we used battery cage model. So at day 14, the birds were challenged individually, giving an oral gavage, including Eimeria acervulina, Eimeria maxima, and Eimeria tenella. And on day 20, birds were euthanized to make intestinal scorings. Some birds were allowed to grow, so we could measure also some of the performance. So the birds were sorted into 4 groups. So we compared 40 ppm of zinc from Avila zinc to zinc sulfate, and we also included 2 treatments with zinc manganese from Avila source and another treatment where we just increased 50% the level of Avila zinc to 60 ppm. Next, please. So when we did these intestinal scorings, we put together all the duodenum from Emeria zerbulina, the jejunum from Emeria maxima, and the ceca from Emeria tenella. And we put all those together, and these are the average of those lesion scorings. In all of the cases, we found an advantage, a significant advantage when we added the avilamine sources. So we can see here a reduction of those lesion scores in these birds. So we can see that the 3 avilamine treatments, either only zinc or zinc and manganese, were able to reduce the severity of those lesions compared to the sulfate. And these birds that reached the 28 days of age, we were able to see some advantages in feed conversion. So that meaning that the recovery of these birds was working better. So we can see that especially Avila ZM 40 and 40 ppm and Avila Zinc at 60 ppm had the lowest feed conversion rate, which showed an improvement and was the most similar to the unchallenged sulfate treatment. And the next one, please. So we have seen already dysbiosis, and we already have seen cocci challenge. Now we are going to talk about the most problematic challenge that we have in non-antibiotic birds, which is necrotic enteritis by Clostridium perfringens. So we made the study was performed by Dr. Chuck Hofrecker with Southern Poultry Research. It was done with Ross 708 males that were challenged using a combined challenge, first with Emeria maxima at 14 days, and then at day 18, 20, and 21 with a strain of Clostridium perfringens that is highly toxigenic and is one of the strains that Dr. Hofrecker keeps in his challenge model. So here we compared high levels of zinc, manganese, and copper to Avila zinc 60 ppm, and then a combination of Avila zinc and Avila copper 60 ppm and 10 ppm respectively, and then Avila zinc and Avila manganese both at 40 ppm. So we wanted to see if zinc alone from avilamines or combined with copper or manganese could provide an advantage when we were talking about necrotic enteritis challenge. Next, please. So the main metric is mortality. We know the industry is always looking at mortality because this is what triggers the treatment of those birds. And once these birds are treated, these birds are no longer useful for the antibiotic-free market. And the cost of processing these birds increases significantly. So this metric would be one of the most important. We can see here that mortality in the sulfate treatment is somehow high. So we are close to 13% mortality. And we have to mention that we compared also with a BMD, which is an antibiotic in a preventive level, 50 milligrams that were added per ton of feed. So we can see here that the response of Avila zinc and Avila zinc combinations are comparable to the BMD preventive level treatment. So we can see here a reduction that is very significant in mortality after that challenge. Some other thing we have to mention here is all these diets contained probiotics that are specific for necrotic enteritis and also contained butyric acid, coated butyric acid that is commonly used in poultry diets in non-antibiotic ever birds. All the birds were sourced from a hatchery that did not vaccinate these birds or did not treat these birds with antibiotics in the hatchery. This I have to correct that. And all the diets also contain enzymes like ITase and chilanase. So it is a complete non-antibiotic ever type model design. So we can see here that there is an advantage of including these sources of trace minerals, especially a ballast zinc source. Next, please. So when we talk about mitigation strategies in a non-antibiotic ever production systems, we have to talk about keeping health in good condition. All is about prevention. So all the management practices have to be in place and run well, even from the hatchery and all through the grow out of the birds. All those vertical transmitted diseases have to be taken care of. And in this case, when we are talking about what we add in the diet is to prevent that leaky gut condition, that intestinal translocation of pathogens. Poultry producers need to rethink their best management practices. So it is important to manage some other things, but managing stocking density is key. If our management practices are in good shape, then we can increase the stocking density. If they are not, then that is a good way to try to keep pathogens in a lower reproduction level. Feed sanitation is critical all the time, and maintaining those birds healthy. Next one, please. It is very common that the industry uses pharmaceutical levels, especially of copper, when we are talking about copper sulfate. But sometimes those pharmaceutical levels are interfering with the absorption of some other important nutrients, like zinc, manganese, iron, copper, even selenium for absorption. So it is important, and this is something that is going to change. There is a trend of reducing these pharmaceutical levels in the industry. Regulations are going against these residues coming out. So the answer is try to use or make those nutritional levels to perform the same as well as they do in controlling those pathogens in the intestinal epithelium or intestinal lumen. So one option is the use of performance trace minerals, as we have proved in these studies. When we are talking about Avala zinc, Avala manganese, and Avala copper, we have here good resources to work with, and that could help us to replace those detrimental levels. So we have optimal gut health, maintain tight junctions, and limit the negative impact of intestinal inflammation, which is what causes the damage in performance. Next slide, please. We have shown in all the studies the difference that are with inorganic sources. It is very common that the industry uses sulfate and hydroxychloride sources of trace minerals. So when we are talking about performance trace minerals, are those minerals that Simpro has selected from having the highest bioavailability in the animal and being more useful and better readily utilized and absorbed by the animal than the inorganic trace mineral sources. Next slide, please. So just making a very quick review on the different sources of trace minerals, we have the inorganic ones. We already mentioned the sulfate sources. There are the oxides, and we have the hydroxychloride sources that are commonly used. When we are talking about the organic sources, we are not necessarily talking about a bounding of these minerals to the organic source. It is very important that we request those products that keep that bounding. And with the performance trace minerals from Simpro, we are talking about these metal amino acid complexes that are one-to-one bound. And this bound is strong enough to survive the acetic acid, the acidity of the stomach, and go and being absorbed as a trace, as an amino acid through the epithelial tissue. When we are talking about other sources of organic trace minerals, they are not necessarily organic up to the point where they should be absorbed, and they end up being absorbed through the inorganic pathway. With the performance trace minerals, we make sure that they are absorbed through the amino acid pathway, and they become available inside the bird in the system. Next slide, please. So there's a lot that goes into a healthy, profitable poultry operation. So we have to make sure that we allow these birds to express their full genetic potential. So one of the ways is we have to use ideal nutrition, and we have to have a well-controlled environment that makes sure this animal is comfortable and this animal is performing well. Performance trace minerals can help poultry producers maximize each phase of their operation, get the most of their investment in each bird. So that means that if we improve nutrition and we continue doing research on this area, making that possible, that's the best way we can help producers to maximize their performance and keep those birds in good shape and healthy. The next one. And that's it. I appreciate your attention and your time. So if there's any question I could entertain, I'll be happy to.
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions for you, Marco. And if anyone else has questions, you can just chat those to me, and I will bring those up here on the call for everybody to hear. But our first question is, Marco, when you were going through and discussing the research related to necrotic enteritis, you mentioned that those birds were being fed probiotics, prebiotics, enzymes. And we know that's used a lot. We've even heard that oregano is used in no antibiotic ever production systems. So are you saying with this research that by using trace minerals, maybe we can delete the need for those other feed additives in our poultry rations, or do they work better together?
Greg, I believe that the best program is a combination. In this study, what we found is that those animals that were fed the abylamines had even better response than those that already had these probiotics and all these feed additives in place. In previous research, we have tried alone the abylamines and with plain feed and the challenge, and it is not enough to reduce that challenge impact. Even when there is a significant reduction, it's not good enough. But we have been thinking about the replacement, and that is a very good point. So replacement could happen, and we will start looking at that in future research. Probably we could replace some of those. It is just enough that we have one portion or one additive working inside the lumen and abylamines working on reinforcing the intestinal barrier system. Probably we don't need all those combinations working inside the lumen because they are serving very similar purposes. So I would like to see just one type of additive working inside the lumen and abylamines working to reinforce the intestinal barrier. I don't know if I answered your question.
Okay, all right. The second question is, in these studies, in one of the studies, you used 40 parts per million. The other study was 60 parts per million of performance trace minerals. What does Zenpro have a recommendation as to what level we should be considering in our rations? And is there a certain stage of production or age of those chicks or birds when performance trace minerals should be included in the diet or the ration?
Yes, well, that is also a very good question. So our nutritional recommendations for a Zinc is 40 ppm. And in challenge studies, we have seen that if we can increase that level, we are able to have a further response, better response. So we have seen that when we increase to 60 ppm, we have a better response. So for us, talking about non-antibiotic ever system, that's the level I would recommend. because we have seen more consistent response. Even when we still see response with the 40 ppm, we can go further in improving if we use the 60 ppm.
Okay. And the last question I've got is, you talked about intestinal inflammation, and, the question relates to how can poultry producers or veterinarians, identify if there's an issue going on? Are there going to be any visual signs, or is it going to be more, what we're going to be seeing as we're doing routine necropsies and we're examining the gut for potential problems?
Yeah, well, it is very easy to see when there is some intestinal problem going on. We usually see the litter and we usually see the droppings. So if we have a nice dark and with those icy tops of the urate from intestinal droppings, we know that the birds are fine. When we see that these droppings become voluminous or watery, then we are start to sort of suspecting there are some dysbiosis going. When we see the cecal droppings that are sort of bubbly, then we have suspicion that there are some bacteria producing gas and developing inside. Then we start to see these birds that have these dirty tails. That is a clear proof that there is something wrong going on. And we usually see these dirty tails around the third, fourth week of age, because there are some window challenges going on with cocci or with protozoa or even with some viruses. But we don't want to see it in a large amount of birds. We don't want to see flocks that are 80% or more with those dirty tails. And of course, we have to corroborate that opening these birds during these posting sessions. And we usually try to score and see those lesions on the mucus. So either caused by cocci or caused by Clostridium or simply a dysbiosis. It is very important that we keep track of those and identify those windows of exposure.
Okay. Well,
be able to prevent.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marco, and that wraps up our questions. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, here within the next hour, you will receive an email from me with the actual presentation, the charts, as well as a link to the recording of the webinar. So, on behalf of Zimpro, we just want to say thank you for joining us this morning. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me, and we will be happy to get you an answer or connect you with Marco to have a more extensive conversation. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Gret.